They said my entire department was legacy overhead, and they said it in front of 40 people while I sat there, trapped in my own chair, listening to a woman who barely understood our safety rules explain why I was no longer worth my salary. I wasn't laid off gently. I was humiliated, dismissed by people who didn't even bother to learn what I protected for 15 years. But here's the part they never saw coming. When they pushed me out, they unknowingly activated a chain of consequences only I could control. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and tell me what city you're watching from. I spent 15 years inside Redwood Fabrication, long enough to know every clank, hiss, and hum of the machines that kept the place alive. People think compliance is paperwork, but in a metalworks shop like ours, compliance is the difference between a worker going home with all 10 fingers or leaving in an ambulance. I wasn't some clipboard ornament floating around looking important. I was the person who made sure safety chains were logged, maintenance cycles were followed, and authorization signatures were filed exactly where state inspectors expected them to be. I didn't do it for awards or praise. There were none. I did it because I'd come from a family where injuries in factories were normal, where a missing hand meant one fewer paycheck, not a compensation lawsuit. I learned early that someone has to be the one who keeps the rules straight. At Redwood, that someone was me. I trained new hires on lockout procedures, rewrote hazard protocols after a near miss that still wakes me up at night, and rebuilt our entire materials handling documentation system by hand after an inspector told us our old process belonged in the 1970s. Still, I wasn't hard to miss. I wasn't loud or flashy. My office was tucked in the older wing of the building, the one with peeling gray paint and pipes that rattled in the winter. I liked it there. It was quiet, I could think. My daughter Lily used to tease me that I'd become part of the building itself. Maybe she was right. I understood Redwood's heartbeat better than most, especially the executives who spent more time in conference rooms than on the floor. I didn't need their approval. I just needed access to do my job, and for 15 years they gave me that. People came to me with problems they didn't want corporate to know about: unlogged machinery downtime, mislabeled shipments, safety drills someone forgot to schedule. I never made a scene. I fixed it quietly. That's the part no one in leadership ever understood. My work wasn't loud because the consequences of ignoring it always were. When things go wrong in a factory, it isn't theoretical. It's a man crushed under a conveyor, a chemical spill everyone smells before they see, a lawsuit that wipes out a family's savings. I carried that weight every day, and I believed Redwood valued that commitment. I believed they valued me. I believed experience mattered. I held on to that belief right up until the morning they brought in someone new, someone with bright lipstick, perfect hair, and a plan to streamline outdated functions. Right up until the moment I realized that belief was about to be tested in a way I never expected. The day everything cracked open started like any other. Bad coffee, a cold hallway, and a safety briefing I had already reviewed twice before sunrise. I walked into the conference room expecting the usual handful of supervisors, a few maintenance leads, and maybe Grant Lawson, our CEO, if he wasn't on another supplier golf meeting. Instead, the room felt staged, almost theatrical. Grant sat at the head of the table in a navy suit he didn't usually bother with, and beside him sat a woman I'd never seen before. Glossy hair, crimson blazer, and a smile sharpened to a point. Her laptop was open, a slideshow paused in bright, aggressive colors. I didn't even have time to sit before Grant cleared his throat and announced, "Everyone, this is Talia Rivers, our new Vice President of Operational Efficiency." Operational efficiency. The title alone made my stomach tighten. Companies only invent roles like that when a consultant whispers that the easiest cost savings come from people who don't shout loud enough to protect themselves. Talia stood, clicking to the first slide without waiting. "Thank you, Grant. I've been reviewing your structure, and Redwood's operational model has a lot of legacy friction, inefficiencies, long-standing habits." Her eyes drifted across the table, lingering on me for a moment longer than the others. "My job is to modernize." I'd heard that word before, modernize. It's corporate code for trimming anything they consider old, slow, or inconvenient. The second slide popped up, streamlining Redwood, Phase 1. Talia walked through her bullet points like she was unveiling a product launch, not rewriting people's futures. Updated workflows, automation suggestions, departmental consolidation opportunities. Then, with a crisp swipe of her touchpad, she revealed the sentence that made the room shift under my feet. Safety and compliance. Legacy department review. A knot formed in my chest. Talia continued, her voice airy, almost cheerful. Based on my analysis, this department has, well, outlived its scalability model. Current documentation practices are deeply manual. Oversight is siloed. Labor hours exceed value contribution. She tapped her screen, zooming directly into a line item. Eliminate safety and compliance lead role. $89,000 annual savings. She said it like she was announcing a sale price. The room froze. Not a single person breathed, but I wasn't surprised. Not fully. I'd sensed something shifting months earlier. Before anyone could question her, Talia delivered the blow with a chirpy confidence that made it worse. Honestly, I don't believe we need a full-time compliance lead anymore. With new workflow apps and digital signatures, so much of this can be automated, streamlined, optimized for speed. Someone at the far end actually nodded. Another whispered, "She's got a point." I stared at the projection of my salary displayed like a clearance sticker and forced myself not to flinch. Talia, feeling the room warming to her, added the line that still echoes in my memory. "This is outdated overhead. Legacy processes with pension plans. We can move Redwood forward without it." Several people glanced at me but looked away just as quickly, like eye contact might burn them. I waited, just one moment for Grant to speak up, to acknowledge the years I spent rebuilding their safety logs, training their crews, preventing the exact disasters that had bankrupted their rival 2 towns over. But he didn't. He didn't even look at me. Talia clicked to the next slide, flipping past my job like it was lint on the carpet. "We'll phase out the role this quarter. Any remaining duties can be redistributed or entered into our new digital systems." I had seen that new system. It was a free trial version of a workflow app no inspector would ever accept. She didn't know that. She didn't even know which certifications required manual signatures by law. At one point, I caught her discreetly Googling a term from her own slides. No one stopped her. No one questioned a single assumption. The humiliation wasn't in losing a job. I'd survived worse in my life. The humiliation was watching a room full of people who had walked into my office begging for help during inspections, people whose mistakes I had quietly fixed, clap for a woman who didn't know the difference between a safety chain log and a material handling variance form. When she concluded her presentation, she looked directly at me and gave a little nod, as if expecting me to thank her for the opportunity to disappear. I clicked my pen once, capped it, and said the only words I could trust my voice to carry: "Are we done here?" That was the moment everything changed, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't know, what none of them knew. They thought they were cutting off dead weight. They had no idea they just severed the one connection keeping their entire operation legally standing, and they wouldn't realize it until it was far too late. When the meeting ended, everyone scattered like someone had thrown a firecracker under the table. Nobody wanted to look at me, much less talk to me. I walked back to my office through the long hallway that ran behind the fabrication floor, my footsteps echoing against steel walls I'd walked past thousands of times. It's strange how a place can feel familiar and foreign at the same time, like the building had already begun pushing me out before anyone filed the paperwork. I closed my office door gently, sat in my chair, and waited for the anger to come, but it didn't. Anger is loud. What I felt was quiet, steady, almost clinical. A part of me had seen this coming the moment Grant started skipping safety briefings and talking about lean culture like it was a religion. I'd survived enough restructurings to know when the newest face in the room has already decided who needs to be reimagined. So instead of boiling over, I did what I'd been trained to do my entire career. I followed procedure, the same procedure they had relied on for 15 years but suddenly believed they could replace with a phone app. I opened my file cabinet, pulled out the hard copy safety authorization logs, and began backing up the signatures. Not digital signatures, the real ones. Inspectors don't trust screens, they trust ink. I scanned every form with the precision of someone who knew each sheet might matter more later than it did now. I saved everything twice. Once onto an encrypted drive and once onto a personal hard copy I kept in a folder labeled Continuity Transfer Log, not as revenge, not as leverage, as insurance, for them and for me. Nobody at Redwood ever understood that safety authorization chains aren't symbolic. They are literal legal structures. When a signature is assigned to a name, removing that name without a formal transfer invalidates the entire chain. It's like removing the bottom rung of a ladder and pretending it's still climbable. But Talia didn't know that. Grant didn't know that. HR didn't even know what half the forms meant. I'd seen emails where someone confused a monthly compliance log with a forklift maintenance checklist. And yet, these were the people deciding what parts of the operation were redundant. I kept copying until my fingers ached. Every emergency drill record, every safety chain revision, every authorization tied to my role. Then I pulled out the transfer clause I had written 3 years earlier after a competitor's accident made national news and forced new state requirements. It stated clearly, explicitly, that the safety and compliance lead must be formally reassigned through leadership approval within 18 days of vacancy. If not, every document tied to that role was null from the date of vacancy forward. When I wrote it, it wasn't to protect myself. It was to protect workers because companies love to move fast when it suits them, and moving fast without transferring safety authority gets people hurt. That clause was supposed to keep Redwood honest. Now it was a ticking clock they didn't even know they'd activated. Once every file was scanned, I prepared a binder with the originals, labeled it, and walked it down to the records room. I placed it on the third shelf, left side, the same spot I always used because consistency matters when someone else needs to find what you left behind. I didn't tell HR. I didn't tell Grant. I didn't tell anyone. People think revenge is some melodramatic outburst, a slam door, a shouted speech, a righteous explosion. But the most devastating consequences don't need theatrics. They need silence, documentation, and a little bit of time. When I left the records room, I passed the conference hallway again. I could hear Talia laughing with someone, probably retelling the moment she announced my job's funeral like it was a punchline worth framing. She thought she'd won. They all did, but they hadn't even started reading the rule book they were about to break, and I had followed every rule to the letter. My official termination didn't happen right away. That would have required confidence Redwood didn't possess. Instead, 4 days after the meeting, HR sent me a cheery little email with a PDF